sometimes the most dangerous predators wear the sweetest smiles. They speak softly, move gently, and make you feel like you're the most important person in their world. They call you pet names that make your heart flutter, and, before you know it, you're trapped in a web so intricate that escape seems impossible. What happens when a simple act of kindness toward a stranger becomes the beginning of your worst nightmare? When someone you thought was harmless turns your life upside down with just one innocent word? This is the story of how a man's compassionate nature led him into the clutches of someone who seemed like an angel but had the heart of a demon. Every choice we make creates ripples in our lives. Sometimes those ripples become tsunamis that destroy everything we hold dear. This is a story about trust betrayed, kindness exploited, and the terrifying reality that evil often comes disguised as vulnerability. Are you ready to discover how one word can change your entire existence? David Martinez had always believed in helping others. At 34, he was the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger with a flat tire or give directions to tourists looking lost in downtown Chicago. His friends often joked that his kindness would get him into trouble someday, but David never listened. He believed that good deeds came back to you, that the universe had a way of rewarding those who showed compassion to others. That Tuesday morning in October started like any other. David grabbed his usual coffee from the corner cafe near his apartment building and headed to his job at the marketing firm where he had worked for 6 years. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were beginning to turn brilliant shades of orange and red. He loved this time of year, when the city seemed to slow down just a little and people appeared more thoughtful, more connected to the world around them. As he walked past the small park that separated his neighborhood from the business district, David noticed someone sitting alone on a bench. She was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, with long brown hair that fell in gentle waves around her shoulders. She was crying softly, her hands covering her face, and her whole body seemed to shake with emotion. David's first instinct was to keep walking, to mind his own business like most city dwellers had learned to do. But something about her posture, the way she seemed so utterly alone and defeated, made him stop. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her or make her feel uncomfortable. When he was a few feet away, he cleared his throat gently and spoke in the kindest voice he could manage. "Excuse me, are you all right?" David asked, his voice soft and concerned. "I don't want to intrude, but you seem upset. Is there anything I can do to help?" The young woman looked up at him with tear-filled eyes that were the most striking shade of green he had ever seen. Her face was delicate and pale, with high cheekbones and full lips that trembled slightly as she tried to compose herself. She looked vulnerable and fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to make a scene. I'm just having a really difficult time right now, and I don't know what to do." David felt his heart go out to her immediately. There was something about her that reminded him of his younger sister, who had struggled with depression and anxiety throughout her teens. He sat down on the bench beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded, and offered her the tissue packet he always kept in his jacket pocket. "There's no need to apologize," he said gently. "We all have bad days. Sometimes it helps to talk about it with someone, even a stranger. I'm David, by the way." "I'm Sarah," she replied, taking a tissue and dabbing at her eyes. "Sarah Collins. Thank you for being so kind. Most people would have just walked past." "Well, I'm not most people, I suppose," David said with a small smile. "What's got you so upset, if you don't mind me asking? Sometimes getting it off your chest can help." Sarah looked at him with those incredible green eyes, and David felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, there was no denying that, but it was more than her looks that drew him to her. There was something about her sadness that made him want to protect her, to fix whatever was wrong in her world. "It's my boyfriend," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly. "Well, my ex-boyfriend now, I guess. We've been together for 3 years, and I thought we were going to get married. I even thought he might propose soon. But last night, I found out he's been cheating on me with my best friend. My best friend since college." "Oh, Sarah," David said, genuinely shocked by the betrayal she had experienced. "I'm so sorry. That's absolutely terrible. You must be devastated." I am, she said, fresh tears beginning to fall. I gave him everything. I moved in with him, helped him through school, supported him when he lost his job. And this is how he repays me. I feel so stupid, so naive. How could I not have seen it? David reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. You're not stupid, he said firmly. When you love someone, you trust them. That's not naive, that's what love is supposed to be. He's the one who betrayed that trust, not you. Sarah took the handkerchief and looked at him with surprise. You still carry actual handkerchiefs? She asked, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips despite her tears. My grandmother always told me a gentleman should carry a clean handkerchief, David replied, feeling pleased that he had managed to lighten her mood, even slightly. She said you never know when someone might need one. She sounds like a wise woman, Sarah said, wiping her eyes with the soft cotton. I wish I had someone like that in my life right now. My parents died in a car accident when I was 21, and I don't have any siblings. It's just been me for the last few years, trying to figure everything out on my own. David felt another wave of sympathy wash over him. This poor girl had lost so much, and now she was dealing with this betrayal on top of everything else. He couldn't imagine how alone she must feel. I'm sorry about your parents, he said sincerely. That must have been incredibly difficult to deal with at such a young age. It was, Sarah said quietly. But I thought I had built a new family with Michael and our friends. I thought I had found my place in the world. Now I realize it was all built on lies. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching as other people walked through the park. Dog walkers, joggers, parents pushing strollers, all going about their daily routines while Sarah's world had fallen apart. David checked his watch and realized he was going to be late for work, but he didn't want to leave her alone when she was so upset. Listen, Sarah, he said carefully, I hate to say this, but I need to get to work. But I don't feel right leaving you here by yourself when you're so upset. Do you have somewhere safe to go? Friends you can stay with? Sarah shook her head sadly. Not really. Most of our friends were Michael's friends first, and after what happened, I don't know who I can trust anymore. I've been staying in a hotel for the past 2 nights because I can't bear to go back to our apartment. That must be expensive, David said, concerned. Are you working? Do you have family you could stay with? I work at a small bookstore downtown, Sarah replied. It doesn't pay much, and, with my parents gone and no siblings, I really am on my own. I'll figure something out, though. I always do. David felt torn. Every instinct he had was telling him to help this woman, but he also knew that getting involved in a stranger's personal problems wasn't always the wisest thing to do. Still, looking at her sad, beautiful face, he couldn't bring himself to just walk away. Look, he said, making a decision that would change his life forever, I know we just met, and this might sound crazy, but I have a spare room in my apartment. It's not much, just a small guest room that I use as an office, but it has a bed and it's clean and safe. You could stay there for a few days while you figure out what you want to do. No strings attached, no expectations. Just one human being helping another. Sarah's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. I couldn't possibly impose like that, she said, but David could hear the hope in her voice. You don't even know me. I could be a crazy person for all you know. David chuckled softly. Well, if you are, you're the nicest crazy person I've ever met. And, besides, I'm a pretty good judge of character. I can tell you're a good person who's just going through a rough time. Everyone needs help sometimes. I don't know what to say, Sarah said, fresh tears beginning to fall, but these seem to be tears of gratitude rather than sadness. I can't believe a complete stranger would be so kind to me. Are you sure? I promise I wouldn't be any trouble. I'm very quiet and clean, and I could help with groceries or housework or anything you need. You don't need to do anything except take care of yourself, David said, standing up and extending his hand to help her up from the bench. Come on, let's get you settled somewhere safe, and then we can figure out the next steps. As Sarah took his hand and stood up, David felt a strange electric sensation run through him. Her hand was small and soft, and she held onto his a moment longer than necessary. When she looked up at him with those green eyes full of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite identify, David felt his heart skip a beat. "Thank you, David," she said softly. "I can't tell you how much this means to me. You're like an angel sent when I needed help the most." "I'm no angel," David replied with a smile. "Just someone who believes in doing the right thing. Now, let's get you out of here. It's getting cold, and you look like you could use a hot meal and a good cup of coffee." As they walked together toward David's apartment building, Sarah slipped her arm through his in a gesture that seemed natural and innocent. David felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the physical contact and everything to do with the satisfaction of helping someone in need. "You know," Sarah said as they walked, "I was sitting on that bench thinking about how cruel the world can be, how there are no good people left. And then, you came along and proved me wrong. Thank you for restoring my faith in humanity." "Don't give me too much credit," David said, though he was pleased by her words. "I just did what anyone with a conscience would do." "No," Sarah said firmly, stopping and turning to look at him directly. "Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have cared. You're special, David Martinez. I can tell." The way she said his name sent a little thrill through him, though he told himself it was just because he was happy to be helping someone. As they continued walking, David found himself stealing glances at Sarah, noticing the graceful way she moved, the musical quality of her laugh when he made a small joke about the unpredictable Chicago weather. When they reached his apartment building, David felt a moment of nervousness. He had never invited a stranger, especially an attractive woman, to stay in his home. But, looking at Sarah's grateful smile, he knew he had made the right decision. She needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. It was as simple as that. As they climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment, David began explaining the layout and making sure she knew where everything was. Sarah listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and commenting on how cozy and welcoming his building felt. "You have excellent taste," she said as he unlocked his door. "I can already tell this is going to be so much better than that horrible hotel room." When David opened the door and showed her into his apartment, Sarah gasped with genuine delight. The space was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and comfortable furniture that looked lived in but well-maintained. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with novels, biographies, and travel guides. The windows faced east, letting in the morning sunlight that made everything glow with a golden warmth. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, running her fingers along the back of his leather sofa. "It feels like a real home, not just a place to sleep. You can tell someone with a good heart lives here." David felt a flush of pride at her compliment. He had worked hard to create a space that reflected his personality and values, and it meant a lot that she appreciated it. As he showed her to the spare room and explained how everything worked, Sarah continued to express her gratitude in ways that made David feel like he was the most wonderful person in the world. "I'll get out of your hair so you can get to work," Sarah said as he finished the tour. "I know you're already late because of me." "Don't worry about it," David said, though he really did need to get going. "Make yourself at home. There's food in the kitchen, and I'll be back around 6. We can figure out dinner then. "That sounds perfect," Sarah said, giving him a smile that lit up her entire face. "Thank you again, David. I'll never forget your kindness." As David gathered his things and prepared to leave for work, he felt a strange reluctance to go. There was something about Sarah's presence that made his apartment feel more alive, more complete somehow. He told himself it was just because he was happy to be helping someone, but, deep down, he suspected there might be more to it than that. "Take care of yourself," he said as he headed toward the door. "And, Sarah? Don't hesitate to call me if you need anything at all. My number is on the notepad by the phone." "I will," she promised, following him to the door. "Have a good day at work, sweetheart." The word hit David like a physical force. Sweetheart. Such a simple, innocent term of endearment, but the way Sarah said it, with genuine warmth and affection, made his heart race. No one had called him that in years, not since his last serious relationship had ended 18 months ago. As he walked to work that morning, David couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and the way she had said that word. It echoed in his mind, making him smile despite himself. He told himself he was just being silly, that she'd probably called everyone sweetheart, that it didn't mean anything special. But, for the rest of that day, as he tried to focus on marketing campaigns and client presentations, David found his thoughts drifting back to the sad, beautiful woman he had left in his apartment. He wondered what she was doing, if she was feeling better, if she was comfortable in his space. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. He had no way of knowing that the woman he thought he was saving was about to become his greatest nightmare. All David knew was that for the first time in months, he was looking forward to going home. When David returned home that evening, he was greeted by the most amazing smell he had encountered in months. Someone was cooking, and, whatever it was, smelled absolutely incredible. As he opened his apartment door, he was hit by the warm aroma of garlic, herbs, and something that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen when he was a child. "Sarah," he called out, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. "In here, sweetheart," came her melodic voice from the kitchen. There was that word again, spoken so naturally and warmly that it made David's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He walked into the kitchen to find Sarah standing at his stove, wearing one of his aprons over a simple black dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she had a slight flush on her cheeks from the heat of cooking. She looked so natural standing there, so perfectly at home in his space, that for a moment David forgot she was essentially a stranger. "I hope you don't mind," Sarah said, turning to face him with a warm smile. "I wanted to do something to thank you for your kindness, and I found all these wonderful ingredients in your kitchen. I'm making my grandmother's famous chicken marsala with homemade pasta." "Mind?" David said, still taking in the incredible scene before him. "Sarah, this is amazing. You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," she insisted, moving gracefully around his kitchen as if she had been cooking there for years. "Besides, I love to cook, and I haven't had a proper kitchen to work in for weeks. Michael never appreciated my cooking. He always wanted to order takeout or go to restaurants." David felt a flash of anger toward the man who had hurt this incredible woman. How could anyone not appreciate coming home to this? How could someone take for granted having such a caring, thoughtful person in their life? "Well, Michael was clearly an idiot," David said, making Sarah laugh in a way that sounded like music. "This smells better than anything I've ever made in this kitchen, and I consider myself a pretty decent cook." "Oh, you cook too?" Sarah asked, her eyes lighting up with interest. "That's wonderful. Most men I know can barely make toast without burning it. You really are special, aren't you, David?" The way she looked at him when she said those words made David feel like the most important man in the world. There was something in her gaze, an intensity and focus that made him feel seen and appreciated in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. "I don't know about special," he said, loosening his tie and rolling up his sleeves. "But I do enjoy cooking. What can I do to help?" "Everything's almost ready," Sarah said, stirring something that smelled like heaven in a pan. "Why don't you open a bottle of wine? I saw you have some nice ones in that rack over there. We should celebrate." "Celebrate what?" David asked, moving toward his small wine collection. "Your kindness," Sarah said simply. "And new beginnings. And the fact that sometimes the universe puts exactly the right people in exactly the right place at exactly the right time." David selected a bottle of red wine that he had been saving for a special occasion, though he couldn't have said what made this evening special. There was just something about the way Sarah moved around his kitchen, the way she made his apartment feel more like a home, that seemed worthy of his best wine. As they sat down to dinner, David was amazed by how natural everything felt. Sarah had set his small dining table beautifully, using candles she had found in his utility drawer and arranging some flowers she had apparently bought during the day. The food was absolutely incredible, better than most restaurants he had been to. "This is unbelievable, Sarah," he said after taking his first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother taught me," Sarah said, her face glowing with pleasure at his compliment. She raised me after my parents died, at least until I was old enough to be on my own. She always said that the way to show someone you care about them is to feed them well. She was a wise woman, David said, taking another bite of the perfectly seasoned chicken. This is seriously restaurant-quality food. You're too kind, Sarah said, but David could tell she was pleased. I just believe that if you're going to do something, you should do it with love and attention to detail. Whether it's cooking or working or taking care of the people who matter to you. As they ate and talked, David found himself more and more impressed by Sarah's intelligence, her thoughtfulness, and her genuine interest in his life. She asked about his work, his family, his dreams and aspirations. She listened to his answers with complete attention, asking follow-up questions that showed she was really hearing what he said. Tell me about your family, she said as they finished the main course. Do you have brothers or sisters? I have a younger sister, Maria, David said, refilling their wine glasses. She's a teacher in Denver. We're close, though we don't get to see each other as often as I'd like. And my parents are retired in Florida. They're good people, very traditional, very family-oriented. They must be proud of you, Sarah said softly. Having a son who's successful and kind and generous. Not everyone would have helped a stranger the way you helped me today. I think they like you, David said, surprising himself with the admission. They always taught me to judge people by their character, not their circumstances. And you have excellent character, Sarah. How can you possibly know that? Sarah asked, but she was smiling. We've known each other for less than 24 hours. Sometimes you just know, David replied. There's something about you, something genuine and warm. The way you've handled everything that's happened to you, the way you show gratitude for simple kindness, the way you put so much care into this meal. It says a lot about who you are as a person. Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her skin was soft and warm, and David felt that electric sensation again, stronger this time. Thank you, she said quietly. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that today. After everything that happened with Michael, I was starting to think there was something wrong with me, something that made me unworthy of love and respect. There's nothing wrong with you, David said firmly, turning his hand over so their palms were touching. Michael was the one with the problem. Any man would be lucky to have someone like you in his life. For a moment, they sat there holding hands across the candlelit table, and David felt something shift between them. The air seemed charged with possibility, with a connection that went deeper than simple attraction or gratitude. David, Sarah said softly, can I ask you something? Of course, he replied, his heart beating a little faster. Do you believe in fate? In the idea that some things are meant to happen? David considered the question carefully. I'm not sure, he said honestly. I believe in being kind to people and doing the right thing. But fate? I don't know. Why do you ask? Because I can't stop thinking about how I ended up on that bench this morning, at exactly the moment when you would be walking by, Sarah said, her green eyes reflecting the candlelight. Out of all the benches in all the parks in this huge city, I chose that one. And out of all the people who walked past me crying, you were the only one who stopped. That seems like more than just coincidence to me. David felt a flutter in his stomach at her words. There was something almost mystical about the way she described their meeting, something that made it seem significant and special rather than random. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe some things are meant to happen. I think they are, Sarah said, giving his hand a gentle squeeze before releasing it. I think you were meant to find me today. I think I was meant to be here, in this beautiful apartment, sharing this meal with the kindest man I've ever met. As the evening progressed, they moved to David's living room, where they continued talking over coffee and the chocolate cake Sarah had somehow managed to bake during the day. David learned that Sarah had studied literature in college, that she loved old movies and classical music, that she dreamed of someday writing a novel but had never had the confidence to try. You should write, David encouraged her. Anyone who can tell stories the way you do, anyone who has such insight into human nature, should definitely write. Maybe someday, Sarah said with a wistful smile. When I figure out what my story is supposed to be. Right now, I feel like I'm in the middle of a chapter one never expected to be writing. The best stories have unexpected chapters, David said. The characters we think we know surprise us. The plot takes turns we never saw coming. Maybe this difficult time is just setting up something wonderful for you. I hope so, Sarah said, curling up in the corner of his sofa with her coffee cup cradled in her hands. I really hope so. As the night grew later, David found himself reluctant to see the evening end. Sarah was the most fascinating woman he had met in years, and her presence in his apartment felt so natural and right that he almost forgot she was supposed to be a temporary guest. I should probably let you get some sleep, Sarah said eventually, noticing him stifle a yawn. You've had a long day, and I've probably talked your ear off. Not at all, David protested. I've really enjoyed tonight. It's been wonderful having company, having someone to cook for and talk to. It's been wonderful for me too, Sarah said, standing up and gathering their coffee cups. More wonderful than I could have imagined when I was sitting on that bench this morning feeling like my world had ended. As she moved around his living room, tidying up and preparing to head to the guest room, David watched her with a growing sense of attachment. In just one day, she had made his apartment feel more alive, more welcoming, more complete. The thought of her leaving in a few days left him feeling strangely empty. Sarah, he said as she prepared to say goodnight, I want you to know that you're welcome to stay as long as you need to. There's no rush for you to figure everything out. Take whatever time you need. Sarah turned to look at him, and David saw tears glistening in her eyes again. But these were different from the tears he had seen that morning. These seemed to be tears of gratitude and something deeper, something that made his heart race. You're too good to me, she said softly. I don't deserve such kindness. Everyone deserves kindness, David replied. Especially people who appreciate it the way you do. Sarah walked over to where he was sitting and leaned down to kiss his cheek. Her lips were soft and warm, and the faint scent of her perfume filled his senses. It was an innocent gesture, a simple thank you kiss, but it affected David more than he cared to admit. Good night, sweetheart, she whispered against his cheek. Thank you for giving me hope again. As she disappeared into the guest room, David sat alone in his living room, his hand unconsciously touching the spot where she had kissed him. The word sweetheart echoed in his mind again, and he realized that he was already looking forward to hearing it again tomorrow. He had no idea that Sarah was lying in the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling with a smile that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with satisfaction. He had no way of knowing that every word she had spoken, every gesture she had made, every tear she had shed had been carefully calculated to have exactly the effect it had had. David went to sleep that night thinking about fate and unexpected chapters and the beautiful, vulnerable woman sleeping just down the hall. He dreamed of green eyes and warm smiles and the word sweetheart spoken in a voice like music. He had no idea that his nightmare was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since David first brought Sarah home, and his life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. Every morning, he woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and homemade breakfast. Every evening, he came home to a spotless apartment, a delicious meal, and the most interesting conversations he had ever had. Sarah had seamlessly integrated herself into his daily routine, anticipating his needs before he even knew he had them. Good morning, sweetheart, Sarah would say each day as he emerged from his bedroom, already dressed and ready for work. She would hand him his coffee exactly the way he liked it, kiss his cheek, and send him off to work with a lunch she had prepared and encouraging words about his day ahead. David's co-workers had begun commenting on the change in him. He seemed happier, more energetic, more confident. His boss had even mentioned that his work quality had improved significantly since he had started coming in with such a positive attitude every morning. You're glowing lately, Martinez, his colleague Jake had said just that morning. What's your secret? New vitamins? Personal trainer? Or maybe a new woman? David had just smiled and deflected the question, but Jake wasn't wrong. There was definitely a new woman, though David wasn't quite sure what to call Sarah. They weren't dating exactly, but their relationship had grown increasingly intimate and complicated with each passing day. It had started innocently enough. Sarah would wait up for him in the evenings, curled up on his couch reading one of his books or watching old movies. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing their dreams for the future, analyzing the books and films they both loved. Gradually, their conversations had become more personal, more revealing. Sarah had told him about her childhood, about the grandmother who had raised her, about the loneliness she had felt growing up without parents or siblings. She painted a picture of herself as someone who had always been searching for a place to belong, for someone who would truly understand and appreciate her. "I've always felt like I was different from other people," she had confided one evening as they sat together on his couch, her head resting on his shoulder. "Like I could see things others couldn't see, understand things others couldn't understand. It made it hard to connect with people, to find someone who really got me." "I understand that feeling," David had replied, stroking her soft hair. "Sometimes I think being sensitive to other people's emotions is more of a curse than a blessing. You see too much, feel too much." "Exactly," Sarah had said, lifting her head to look at him with those incredible green eyes. "But, with you, I don't feel like I have to hide who I am. I can be myself completely, and you not only accept it, you seem to love it about me." The word love had hung in the air between them, neither of them quite ready to address what was happening between them, but both aware that their relationship was evolving into something deeper than friendship or temporary roommate arrangement. It was during the third week that things had shifted dramatically. David had come home from work to find Sarah in tears again, sitting at his kitchen table with a letter in her hands. "What's wrong?" he had asked immediately, dropping his briefcase and rushing to her side. "It's from Michael," Sarah had said through her tears. "He's been trying to reach me, and somehow he found out where I'm staying. He wants to see me. He says he's sorry and wants to work things out." David had felt a surprising surge of jealousy and protectiveness. The thought of Sarah going back to the man who had betrayed her so cruelly made him physically ill. "You're not seriously considering it, are you?" he had asked, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the emotions churning inside him. "I don't know," Sarah had said helplessly. "Part of me wants to hear what he has to say. We were together for 3 years. Maybe I owe it to what we had to at least listen." "You don't owe him anything," David had said more forcefully than he had intended. "He betrayed you in the worst possible way. He gave up any right to your consideration when he chose to sleep with your best friend." Sarah had looked at him with surprise, and David realized he had revealed more of his feelings than he had intended. There was no hiding the fact that he cared about her deeply, that the thought of losing her to another man was unbearable. "David," Sarah had said softly, reaching out to touch his face. "Are you saying you don't want me to see him because you have feelings for me?" The question had hung between them like a bridge that once crossed, could never be uncrossed. David had looked into her beautiful face, seen the hope and vulnerability in her eyes, and made the decision that would seal his fate. "Yes," he had admitted. "I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. I know it's crazy, and I know the timing is terrible, but I can't help how I feel. You've become so important to me, Sarah. I can't imagine my life without you in it." Sarah's response had been everything he could have hoped for and more. She had thrown her arms around him, kissing him with a passion that took his breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, she had looked at him with tears of joy rather than sadness. "I have feelings for you too," she had whispered. "I have since that first day when you stopped to help me. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude, but it's so much more than that. You're everything Michael never was: kind, generous, thoughtful, genuine. I think I'm falling in love with you." That night, Sarah had moved from the guest room into David's bedroom, and their relationship had become everything he had dreamed it could be. She was passionate and tender, giving and responsive. She made him feel like the most desirable man in the world, like he was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered. But it wasn't just the physical relationship that captivated David. Sarah seemed to understand him on a level no one ever had before. She listened to his fears about work, his concerns about his aging parents, his dreams of maybe starting his own marketing firm someday. She offered insights and encouragement that made him feel stronger and more capable. "You're brilliant at what you do," she would tell him after he had shared a particularly challenging work situation. Your clients are lucky to have someone who cares as much as you do about their success. Don't let anyone make you doubt your abilities. Sarah had also begun making subtle suggestions about his life that seemed designed to bring them closer together. She had mentioned how nice it would be if he had a car so they could take weekend trips together. She had commented on how his apartment would be perfect if it just had a few more feminine touches. She had suggested that he should consider switching banks to one that offered better interest rates, coincidentally the same bank where she had her accounts. Each suggestion seemed reasonable and, well-intentioned, motivated by her desire to help him improve his life. And David, basking in the glow of being loved and cared for by such an incredible woman, had been happy to consider her ideas. It was the fourth week when the first real red flag appeared, though David was so deeply under Sarah's spell that he barely noticed it. He had come home from work to find Sarah on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone. When she saw him, she had quickly ended the call and smiled brightly, but David had caught a glimpse of something in her expression that seemed almost calculating. "Who was that?" he had asked casually as he hung up his jacket. "Oh, just someone from the bookstore," Sarah had said, moving quickly to give him his usual welcome home kiss. "They wanted me to cover an extra shift this weekend, but I told them I had plans with my handsome boyfriend." The explanation had seemed reasonable, but something about the way she had changed the subject so quickly nagged at David. For just a moment, he had wondered if Sarah was being completely honest with him about her past and her current situation. But then, she had produced another incredible dinner and spent the evening asking about his day and sharing funny stories from the bookstore, and David's doubts had melted away. How could he question someone who brought so much joy and love into his life? It was during that same week that Sarah had suggested they should probably make their relationship official by having David meet her friends and co-workers. She had proposed that he come to a small gathering at the bookstore where she worked, just a casual get-together where he could meet the people who were important to her. "I want everyone to see how amazing you are," she had said, her eyes shining with what looked like genuine pride and affection. "I want them to understand how lucky I am to have found someone like you." David had been touched by her desire to include him in her social circle, and he had agreed immediately. Looking back, he should have been suspicious that someone who claimed to have lost all her friends in the breakup with Michael would suddenly have a group of people eager to meet her new boyfriend. But, at the time, he had been so happy to be moving forward in their relationship that he hadn't questioned the inconsistency. The gathering at the bookstore had been small and informal, just Sarah, David, and 3 other people she introduced as her co-workers. They had all seemed nice enough, though David had noticed they didn't seem to know Sarah very well. When he had mentioned how amazing her cooking was, they had looked surprised, as if they didn't know she could cook at all. "Sarah never mentioned she was a chef," one of them had said with a laugh. "She always brings sandwiches for lunch like the rest of us." Sarah had quickly explained that she only cooked special meals for special people, and the moment had passed. But, again, David had felt that small nagging doubt, the sense that something wasn't quite adding up. The doubts had become stronger the next week when David had decided to surprise Sarah by stopping by the bookstore during her lunch break. He had wanted to take her out for a nice meal and had brought flowers to brighten her day. But, when he had arrived at the bookstore and asked for Sarah Collins, the manager had looked confused. "I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name working here," the manager had said. "Are you sure you have the right store?" David had stood there holding the flowers, feeling confused and slightly embarrassed. Sarah had been very specific about where she worked, had mentioned the store by name multiple times. She had even shown him her name tag. When he had gotten home that evening and asked Sarah about it, she had seemed genuinely shocked by the manager's response. "That's so strange," she had said, frowning with concern. "Maybe he's new? Or maybe he was thinking of full-time employees only? I'm just part-time, and sometimes the managers don't keep track of all the part-time staff." The explanation had made sense, and Sarah had seemed so genuinely confused by the miscommunication that David had felt bad for doubting her. She had even offered to call the store the next day to clear up the confusion. "I'm so sorry that happened," she had said, kissing him softly. "How embarrassing for you. I'll make sure to straighten it out tomorrow." But David had noticed that she never mentioned speaking to her manager again, and when he had suggested stopping by the store another time, Sarah had always had a reason why it wasn't a good idea. "They're really strict about personal visits during work hours," she would say. "I don't want to get in trouble and lose my job, especially when I'm finally getting back on my feet financially." The financial comment had been another small puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Sarah had been staying with him for over a month now, contributing to groceries and household expenses despite her supposedly limited income from part-time work at the bookstore. She always had money for the expensive ingredients she used in her elaborate meals, for the small gifts she bought him, for the personal items she needed. When David had gently asked how she was managing financially, Sarah had explained that she had some savings from her previous life with Michael, plus a small inheritance from her grandmother that she had been careful with over the years. "I'm not rich by any means," she had said, "but I'm not destitute either. I can take care of myself, though I love being able to take care of you too." Every explanation Sarah gave was reasonable, every inconsistency had a logical answer. And the way she looked at him when she answered his questions, with such apparent openness and sincerity, made David feel guilty for doubting her at all. Because the truth was, David didn't want to find problems with Sarah's stories. His life had never been better than it was with her in it. She made him feel loved, desired, important, and special in ways he had never experienced before. She had become the center of his world, the thing he looked forward to most about each day. So when small doubts crept into his mind, David pushed them away. When inconsistencies appeared in Sarah's stories, he accepted her explanations and moved on. When his instincts told him something might be wrong, he ignored them in favor of believing in the love he thought they shared. It was easier to trust than to question. It was easier to believe than to investigate. And Sarah was very, very good at making it easy for him to choose trust over suspicion, love over doubt. She would look at him with those beautiful green eyes, call him sweetheart in that voice like music, and tell him how much he meant to her. She would cook his favorite meals, listen to his problems with complete attention, and make him feel like the most important person in her world. "I love you so much, David," she would whisper as they lay in bed together. "You saved me, you know that? You literally saved my life when you found me on that bench. I'll never forget that. I'll never stop being grateful for the love and kindness you've shown me." And David, drowning in the intoxication of being loved so completely by such a beautiful woman, would hold her close and promise that he would never let anyone hurt her again. He would tell her that finding her was the best thing that had ever happened to him, that she had made his life complete in ways he hadn't even known were possible. What David didn't know was that while he was falling deeper in love with Sarah every day, she was methodically gathering information about his life, his finances, his habits, and his vulnerabilities. She was making careful notes about his passwords, his social security number, his bank account information, and his credit card details. She was building a profile of everything that made David Martinez who he was, and she was preparing to use that information in ways that would destroy everything he held dear. But, for now, David was happy. He was in love, he was loved in return, and he believed that he had found the person he was meant to spend the rest of his life with. The trap had been set perfectly, and David had walked into it willingly, eagerly, with his eyes wide open and his heart full of trust. All that remained was for the trap to close. The first real crack in David's perfect world appeared on a rainy Thursday morning in November, exactly 6 weeks after he had met Sarah. He had woken up feeling slightly unwell, with a headache and mild nausea that made the thought of going to work unappealing. When he had mentioned this to Sarah over breakfast, she had been immediately sympathetic and attentive. "You poor sweetheart," she had said, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "You do feel a little warm. Why don't you call in sick today? You work too hard anyway, and your body is telling you it needs rest." David had been reluctant at first. He had an important client presentation that afternoon, and he prided himself on his reliability and work ethic. But Sarah had been so persuasive, so caring in her concern for his health, that he had eventually agreed to stay home. "I'll take excellent care of you," Sarah had promised, kissing his forehead gently. "You just rest, and I'll handle everything else." David had spent the morning dozing fitfully on the couch, drifting in and out of sleep while Sarah moved quietly around the apartment. She brought him tea, checked his temperature, and generally fussed over him in a way that made him feel cherished and cared for, even in his discomfort. It was around noon when David had gotten up to use the bathroom and had accidentally walked in on Sarah in his home office. She had been sitting at his desk with his laptop open, and, when she saw him, she had quickly closed the computer with an expression of surprise and something that looked almost like guilt. "Oh, sweetheart, you startled me," she had said, standing up quickly and moving toward him. "I was just checking my email. I hope you don't mind that I used your computer. Mine has been acting up lately." "Of course I don't mind," David had said, though something about the scene had felt off. Sarah had seemed nervous, flustered in a way he had never seen before. And why had she closed the laptop so quickly when she saw him? "How are you feeling?" Sarah had asked, effectively changing the subject by placing her hands on his chest and looking up at him with concern. "You still look pale. Maybe you should take some medicine and try to sleep a bit more." David had allowed himself to be led back to the living room, accepting the medicine Sarah offered and settling back onto the couch. But, for the rest of the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the incident had been wrong. Sarah's reaction had been too strong, too defensive for someone who was simply checking email. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, David had quietly checked his laptop. His browser history showed nothing unusual, just his own searches from the previous days. His email showed no signs of being accessed. Everything appeared normal, and David had told himself he was being paranoid, possibly because he was still feeling unwell. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and, over the next few days, David found himself noticing things he had previously overlooked. Small things, subtle things, but things that began to add up to a troubling pattern. He noticed that Sarah often seemed to know things about his schedule that he hadn't told her. She would have dinner ready at exactly the right time when he was working late, even though he hadn't mentioned he would be late. She would comment on phone calls he had received at work, conversations he was sure he had never shared with her. When David had casually asked how she knew about a particular client meeting, Sarah had smiled and said, "You told me about it yesterday, sweetheart. Don't you remember? You said you were worried about the presentation." But David was certain he hadn't mentioned the meeting. He had a good memory for conversations, especially conversations with Sarah, and he distinctly remembered deciding not to tell her about this particular meeting because it involved some confidential client information. More disturbing were the small financial discrepancies David began to notice. A charge on his credit card for a restaurant he had never been to. A small withdrawal from his checking account that he couldn't account for. When he had asked Sarah if she knew anything about these transactions, she had seemed genuinely confused and concerned. "That's really strange," she had said, frowning as she looked at his bank statements. "Are you sure you didn't make these transactions and just forgot? You've been working so hard lately, and you were sick last week. Maybe you're just not remembering clearly." Again, her explanation was reasonable, and her concern seemed genuine. But the discrepancies continued to appear, always small amounts, always for things that could conceivably have been innocent mistakes or lapses in memory. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a cold December evening that would be forever burned into David's memory. He had come home from work to find Sarah waiting for him with an expression he had never seen before. Gone was the warm, welcoming smile he had grown to expect. Instead, she looked serious, almost businesslike, and there was something in her green eyes that made David's stomach clench with sudden fear. "We need to talk," Sarah said without preamble, gesturing for him to sit down in his own living room. The way she said it, the way she positioned herself standing while he sat, made David feel like a guest in his own home. "What's wrong?" David asked, his mind racing through possibilities. "Did something happen? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah said, her voice strangely flat and emotionless. "But you're about to have some problems, and I thought it would be better if I explained the situation to you clearly so there's no confusion." David felt his blood turn to ice. The woman standing in front of him looked like Sarah, sounded like Sarah, but everything about her demeanor was completely different. Gone was the soft, vulnerable woman who called him sweetheart and cooked his favorite meals. In her place was someone cold, calculating, and utterly without warmth. What kind of problems? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, which she placed on the coffee table in front of him. "Open it," she said simply. With trembling hands, David opened the folder and felt the world tilt on its axis. Inside were photocopies of documents he recognized, bank statements, credit card applications, loan papers, all bearing his personal information but not his signature. There were records of accounts he had never opened, debts he had never incurred, purchases he had never made. "What is this?" David asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Insurance," Sarah said calmly. "Over the past 2 months, I've been very busy. I've opened several credit cards in your name, taken out a personal loan using your information, and made quite a few purchases that you're going to be responsible for paying off." David stared at the papers in horror, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "This is identity theft," he said finally. "This is fraud. You could go to prison for this." "I could," Sarah agreed with a small smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "But I won't. Because you're not going to report it." "Like hell I won't," David said, starting to stand up. "You've destroyed my credit, stolen my identity, committed federal crimes. I'm calling the police right now." "No, you're not," Sarah said, her voice still maddeningly calm. "Because if you do, I'll destroy your life in ways that will make this financial damage look like pocket change." She reached into her purse again and pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. "Would you like to see what else I've been working on during our time together?" David's hands shook as he opened the second folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing him in various states of undress, in compromising positions, in intimate moments he had believed were private. There were screenshots of text messages that had been edited to make him look like a predator, emails that had been doctored to suggest illegal business practices, and voice recordings of conversations that had been manipulated to take his words completely out of context. "Where did you get these?" David asked, his voice hoarse with shock and horror. "I took them, of course," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "Hidden cameras are so small these days, and you were so trusting, so eager to believe everything I told you. You never questioned why I always seemed to know so much about your life, why I was always in the right place at the right time with exactly what you needed." David felt physically sick as the full scope of her deception became clear. "The crying on the bench," he said slowly. "The story about your cheating boyfriend. Your job at the bookstore. All of it was lies." "All of it," Sarah confirmed cheerfully. "I researched you for weeks before we accidentally met. I knew your routine, your route to work, your weaknesses. I knew exactly what kind of woman would appeal to you, exactly what story would make you want to rescue me. You made it so easy, David. You practically begged me to move in with you." "Why?" David whispered. "Why me? What did I ever do to deserve this?" Sarah's expression softened slightly, and, for a moment, David saw a flicker of something that might have been genuine emotion. "You didn't do anything to deserve it," she said quietly. "That's what made you such a perfect target. You're kind, trusting, successful, and lonely. You have money but not enough to hire security or private investigators. You're the type of man who wants to believe the best about people, who wants to help and protect and love. In other words, you're exactly the kind of person someone like me lives to find." "Someone like you?" David repeated. "What are you? A professional criminal?" Sarah laughed, and the sound was nothing like the musical laughter David remembered from their early days together. This laugh was harsh, predatory, and completely without joy. "I prefer to think of myself as someone who exploits human weaknesses for financial gain," she said. "Some people invest in stocks, some people play the lottery. I invest time in identifying and manipulating men who have something I want. It's actually quite lucrative when done properly." "How many?" David asked, dreading the answer. "How many men have you done this to?" "You're number 7, Sarah said proudly. "Though you've been by far the most profitable and the most entertaining. The others were too suspicious, too careful. But you, David, you threw yourself into this relationship so completely, so trustingly. You made my job almost too easy. David felt bile rise in his throat as he realized the full extent of his naivety. Every moment of tenderness, every declaration of love, every intimate gesture had been an act, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to rob him of everything he had worked for. The things you said, he whispered. The way you acted. Was any of it real? For the first time since she had begun her revelation, Sarah's expression showed something that might have been regret. You know, David, in a different life, under different circumstances, I might have actually cared about you. You really are a good man, and you treated me better than any mark I've ever had. But feelings are a luxury I can't afford in my line of work. So what happens now? David asked, though he was terrified to hear the answer. Sarah sat down across from him, once again becoming the woman who had shared his bed and his life for 2 months. Now you have a choice, she said in the same reasonable tone she had used to discuss dinner plans and weekend activities. You can try to fight this, report me to the police, contest the debts, and spend the next several years of your life in court trying to prove your innocence while these photos and recordings destroy your career, your relationships, and your reputation. By the time you're finished, you'll be bankrupt from legal fees, unemployed, and probably facing your own criminal charges based on the evidence I've manufactured against you. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. Or you can be smart about this. You can quietly pay off the debts I've incurred in your name, accept this as an expensive lesson in trusting strangers, and move on with your life. The total damage is about $43,000, which I know you can afford. It's a lot of money, but it's not enough to ruin you permanently if you're careful. David stared at her in disbelief. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a business arrangement, Sarah corrected. $43,000 in exchange for all the evidence I have against you and a promise that our paths will never cross again. It's actually quite generous when you consider what this could cost you if you choose to fight it. And if I refuse? Sarah's smile became genuinely frightening. Then, you'll discover just how creative I can be when someone doesn't cooperate with me. You'll lose your job, your reputation, your friends, your family's respect, and probably your freedom. I've done this before, David. I know exactly how to destroy a man's life so completely that he wishes he had just paid me what I asked for in the beginning. David sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening to him. 2 hours ago, he had believed he was in love with a wonderful woman who loved him in return. Now he was discovering that everything he had believed about his life for the past 2 months had been an elaborate lie designed to rob him. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course you do, Sarah said, standing up and smoothing her dress. Take all the time you need. I'll be in the guest room packing my things. I'd like an answer by morning, though. I have other business to attend to, and I can't wait around indefinitely. As Sarah walked toward the hallway, she turned back to look at him one more time. For what it's worth, David, I am sorry it worked out this way. You really are a good man, and you deserve better than this. But this is the world we live in, and this is what I do to survive in it. Try not to take it personally. David watched her disappear down the hallway, moving through his apartment with the same grace and familiarity she had shown for 2 months, but now he saw it for what it really was, the practiced movements of a predator who had been studying his territory. He sat alone in his living room, surrounded by the evidence of his own destruction, and tried to figure out how he had missed all the signs that now seemed so obvious in retrospect. How had he been so blind, so trusting, so willing to believe that someone like Sarah could love someone like him? The word sweetheart echoed in his memory, but now it sounded like mockery rather than affection. Every time she had said it, she had been laughing at him inside, congratulating herself on how easily she was manipulating him. David buried his face in his hands and tried not to think about how he was going to explain this to his family, his friends, his co-workers. He tried not to think about how many other men Sarah had destroyed before him, and how many more she would destroy after him. Most of all, he tried not to think about how completely and utterly he had been broken by someone he had trusted with his heart. The trap had closed with perfect precision, and David Martinez was caught in its jaws with no hope of escape. David spent the entire night sitting in his living room, staring at the evidence of his destruction spread across his coffee table. The folders Sarah had left contained more than just financial documents and compromising photos. They contained the complete dismantling of everything he had believed about himself, about love, and about human nature. As dawn broke over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gray that matched David's mood, he made his decision. He would pay Sarah what she demanded, not because he was a coward, but because he realized that fighting her would only give her more opportunities to hurt him. She had planned this too well, anticipated his every possible response, and armed herself with enough manufactured evidence to destroy him regardless of the truth. When Sarah emerged from the guest room that morning, she was once again the picture of composed elegance. She had packed her few belongings into the same small suitcase she had brought when David first invited her to stay, erasing any evidence that she had ever lived in his apartment. "Have you made your decision?" she asked, settling gracefully into the chair across from him as if they were discussing weekend plans rather than extortion. "I'll pay," David said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night of crying, raging, and ultimately accepting his fate. "But I want it all. Every photo, every recording, every piece of manufactured evidence you have against me." Of course, Sarah agreed readily. "I'm a professional, David. I always honor my agreements. You'll get everything, and I'll disappear from your life forever. You have my word." "Your word," David repeated bitterly. "Forgive me if I don't find that particularly reassuring." Sarah's expression softened slightly, and, for a moment, David caught a glimpse of the vulnerable woman he thought he had fallen in love with. But he knew now that it was just another mask, another manipulation designed to make him feel sorry for her even as she destroyed him. "I know you hate me right now," she said quietly. "And you have every right to. But I want you to know that the time I spent with you wasn't entirely unpleasant. You're a good man, David, and, in another life, things might have been different between us." "Don't," David said sharply. "Don't you dare try to make this about feelings or missed opportunities. You're a predator, and I was your prey. That's all this was, all it ever was. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending there was ever anything real between us." Sarah nodded, accepting his rebuke without argument. "You're right," she said. "I apologize for trying to soften this. You deserve honesty, at least now at the end." The financial transfer took place that afternoon at David's bank, where Sarah waited patiently while he liquidated investments, closed savings accounts, and arranged for a cashier's check in the amount she had demanded. The bank manager, concerned about such a large withdrawal, had tried to verify that David wasn't being coerced, but David had assured him that the transaction was voluntary. As they left the bank together, Sarah handed him a flash drive containing all the digital evidence she had gathered against him, along with written confirmation that she would make no further financial claims on him. "This is everything," she said, standing on the sidewalk outside the bank as if they were simply concluding a business meeting. "You'll never see me again, David. I'm sorry it ended this way." "No, you're not," David replied, pocketing the flash drive. "You're sorry you can't squeeze more money out of me, but you're not sorry for what you've done. If you were sorry, you wouldn't do this to people." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, and David thought he saw something like genuine remorse in her green eyes. But then, she smiled, and the expression was so cold and calculating that David wondered if he had imagined the moment of humanity. "Goodbye, David," she said simply, and then, she walked away down the busy Chicago street, disappearing into the crowd as if she had never existed at all. David stood outside the bank for nearly an hour, watching the people walk by and wondering how many of them had secrets, how many were hiding their true natures behind carefully constructed facades. He felt like he had been living in a world of illusion, and, now that the illusion was shattered, he didn't know how to navigate reality. The weeks that followed were the darkest period of David's life. He went through the motions of his daily routine, going to work, eating meals, maintaining his apartment, but everything felt hollow and meaningless. He had lost more than money in his encounter with Sarah. He had lost his ability to trust his own judgment, his faith in human goodness, and his belief that the world was fundamentally fair. His work performance suffered as he struggled to concentrate on marketing campaigns and client presentations when all he could think about was how completely he had been fooled. His colleagues noticed the change in him, the way his previous enthusiasm and confidence had been replaced by a kind of grim competence that got the job done but brought no joy to the process. "You seem different lately," his friend Jake had commented one evening after work.
Everything okay at home?
Everything's fine, David had lied, because how could he explain that he had fallen in love with a woman who turned out to be a professional con artist who had robbed him of nearly $50,000? How could he admit that he had been so naive, so desperate for love, that he had ignored every red flag and walked willingly into her trap? The worst part was the way the experience had changed his perception of every interaction with other people. When a waitress was particularly friendly, David found himself wondering what she wanted from him. When a neighbor offered to help him carry groceries, he questioned her motives. When a woman at the gym smiled at him, he immediately assumed she was running some kind of con. Sarah had not just stolen his money, she had stolen his ability to believe in the basic goodness of human nature. She had turned him into the kind of suspicious, cynical person he had never wanted to be. 3 months after Sarah disappeared from his life, David received a phone call that would change everything once again. The caller identified herself as Detective Lisa Morrison from the Chicago Police Department, and she was calling about an ongoing investigation into a woman named Sarah Collins. "Mr. Martinez," Detective Morrison said, "I understand you may have had a relationship with a woman going by the name Sarah Collins sometime between October and December of last year.
Is that correct?"
David's heart began to race. "Yes," he said cautiously.
"Why? What's this about?"
"We're investigating Ms. Collins in connection with several cases of identity theft, fraud, and extortion," the detective explained. "We believe she may have victimized as many as 12 men over the past 3 years, and we're trying to build a case against her."
"Would you be willing to come in and speak with us about your experiences with her?"
David felt a mixture of vindication, terror, and hope wash over him. On one hand, it was gratifying to know that Sarah was being investigated and might finally face consequences for her actions. On the other hand, the thought of having to relive his experience and admit his foolishness to law enforcement was humiliating.
"How did you find me?"
David asked. "We've been tracking her methods and identifying her victims through financial records and other evidence," Detective Morrison explained. "Your name came up in connection with several suspicious financial transactions that match her pattern. We also have witness testimony from other victims that helped us identify her most recent targets." David agreed to meet with the detective, and 2 days later he found himself in a sterile conference room at the police station, telling his story to Detective Morrison and her partner, Detective James Chen. The experience was both cathartic and mortifying, finally, being able to tell someone the truth about what had happened to him, but having to admit how completely he had been manipulated. "Don't feel bad about falling for her act," Detective Morrison said after David had finished his account. "Sarah Collins, and that's not her real name, by the way, is one of the most sophisticated con artists we've ever encountered. She's highly intelligent, extremely manipulative, and very good at identifying and exploiting people's emotional vulnerabilities."
"What's her real name?"
David asked. "We're not entirely sure," Detective Chen admitted. "She's used at least 6 different identities that we know of. Her fingerprints aren't in the system, and she's very careful about avoiding surveillance cameras and official documentation. But we're getting closer to identifying her true identity." The detectives explained that Sarah's method was always the same: extensive research on potential targets, elaborate cover stories designed to appeal to each victim's specific personality and needs, and a careful escalation from emotional manipulation to financial exploitation. "She typically spends 6 to 8 weeks with each victim," Detective Morrison explained. "Just long enough to establish trust and gather the information she needs, but not so long that they start to question inconsistencies in her story." "You actually knew her longer than most of her victims."
"Lucky me," David said bitterly.
Over the next several months, David worked with law enforcement to help build their case against Sarah. He provided financial records, testified before a grand jury, and identified Sarah from surveillance footage captured near the homes of other victims. It was a difficult process that forced him to relive his experience over and over again, but it also helped him begin to heal from the trauma she had inflicted. The most important part of the healing process was meeting Sarah's other victims. Detective Morrison arranged for a support group where the men she had targeted could share their experiences and help each other process what had happened to them. David learned that he was far from alone in his experience. Mark, a 41-year-old engineer, had met Sarah in a coffee shop where she was crying over a book about lost love. She had told him she was a graduate student studying literature, and, over the course of 2 months, she had stolen his identity and maxed out his credit cards. James, a 38-year-old teacher, had encountered Sarah at a bookstore where she was asking for recommendations for her book club. She had convinced him that she was a fellow educator struggling to make ends meet, and she had ultimately stolen nearly $30,000 from him through various financial schemes. Each victim had a similar story: a chance encounter with a beautiful, vulnerable woman who seemed to need rescuing, followed by a whirlwind romance that ended in financial and emotional devastation. Sarah had studied each of them carefully, crafting a persona that would appeal specifically to their individual psychology and circumstances. "The thing that bothers me most," Mark said during one of their support group meetings, "is how she knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. It's like she could see into my soul and identify all my insecurities and desires."
That's what makes her so dangerous, James added. She's not just stealing money, she's stealing our ability to trust our own judgment. How do we ever date again? How do we ever believe someone when they say they love us?
These questions haunted David as well, but, gradually, through therapy and the support of other survivors,